G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Today we are talking statistical scarcity. What should you be targeting at what point in the draft? Let's go!
Jordan open. Chicago with the lead. Bryant to Shaq.
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible.
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang!
Curry for three. Wow! Unbelievable. Making it rain in New York.
We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at BallBoysNBA and on Instagram at BallBoysFantasyBasketball. Today we are talking about a topic that I think is quite valuable and an important concept for us to understand when it comes to making the most out of our fantasy draft strategy. It's the concept of statistical scarcity. Which stats dry up the fastest in drafts? Which stats can I find later in the draft and stream off the waiver wire? And how does this affect my draft strategy? So we're going to cover that all in today's episode. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure 2/3 of you guys that are listening are not subscribed. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and you'll get access to and notified all the content we do during the preseason and once the season starts. So we're going to be keeping this fantasy basketball train going all the way along throughout the season. So again, hit that subscribe button. If you want some more help with your draft, as well as our rankings, head over to ballboysnba.com. You can sign up to our season guide for just $10, which will cover you for the whole season. Again, when you sign up with that draft guide, it'll cost you $10. That'll cover you for the whole season. It'll say it's $10 per year, but at the end of the season, all subscriptions will be cancelled. So don't cancel it yourself once you sign up. It means that you won't be able to then get access to the season guide later. I've had a couple people do that, but all subscriptions will be cancelled at the end of the season. So don't worry, it won't charge you again. If you want it again, then you can sign up again next year, but it's not going to be a yearly ongoing subscription sort of thing. All right, we're going to get stuck into statistical scarcity. Now, we'll see how we go. It might be a bit of a shorter episode here today, guys, but statistical scarcity, we're going to start by talking about the stats that are and the categories that are hardest to make up later or the ones that are the earliest to dry up in fantasy drafts. There are probably three main ones that are the hardest to target later in the draft, and I think that means you should be prioritizing them in your league if you want to be competitive in those categories. If you don't, then that's fine. You can punt them, and I think a lot of these categories are very good categories to punt. But if you are wanting to be good in those categories, then you should prioritize them perhaps over some of the others. So the first one, and I think it's probably the one that's least talked about, and it's probably the most difficult one to change once you get outside of the first 2 or 3 rounds, and it is the free throw percentage category. It is so hard to change your team's free throw percentage after the first 3 rounds of drafts because of the amount of volume that your first 3 round picks will be taking at the free throw line. Now, you can get someone who shoots 90% or 85% later in the draft. That's fine, but they're probably going to be doing it on like 2 to 3 attempts per game. So when you add them up in a weekly sample size, it's not going to be enough volume to dramatically swing your team's free throw percentage one way or the other. So the reason that this is the hardest category to change later is because of that volume. If we look at the Basketball Monster value column, when you go over to there and look at the rankings from last year, there were 18 players that gave you at least a 1 standard deviation difference in a positive in the free throw percentage category. So only 18 players increasing your free throw percentage by at least 1 standard deviation. That's not many. And of those 18 players, 14 of them you're going to have to draft in your first 3 rounds this season. So 6 of them are in your first round. Damian Lillard, Trae Young, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Steph Curry, and Joel Embiid. There's 6 of your 18 players. So 1/3 of them are in the first round. Second round, you're looking at guys like Devin Booker, Kyrie Irving, Kawhi Leonard, and Fred VanVleet. So, okay, we're already up to 10 players, over half of them in the first 2 rounds. Round 3, you're looking at DeMar DeRozan, Jimmy Butler, Darius Garland, and Bradley Beal. So your first 3 rounds, you've already gone through 14 guys. There are some guys you can get later. Zach LaVine, again, he's probably a 4th round player. Chris Middleton, 4th round player. Kristaps Porzingis is going in the 4th round. The only player that you can really get later in the draft that has a decent impact is Jordan Poole, who did shoot like 92% from the free throw line. So he's the only guy that really you can get outside the top 50 that's going to increase your free throw percentage by more than 1 standard deviation. Again, that's a combination of what they shoot and how many times they get to the line. So when I say things like, I believe that Luka Doncic is a punt free throw percentage player, it's because even though he is only subpar and it's not a huge negative, it is just so hard to get guys that can counter his volume at a subpar percentage unless I attack it straight away. Second round, third round. If I get Devin Booker and then I get a Jimmy Butler in rounds 2 and 3, sure, I can make up for it. But do I want to do that? Maybe I'd just rather punt the category and forget about it. That's why that category is very, very difficult to change outside of the top 50. There's really no one. You can get someone like a Larry Marketing, who's a good free throw percentage, but he's not going to get to the line as much. You can get someone like a Devin Vassell, who's a good free throw percentage shooter, but again, not going to get to the line that much. So these guys here will be the biggest shifter in that category. And in my opinion, it's the hardest one to change later on. And all the while, you've got guys who are going to be negatives in that categories, the big guys that drain your free throw percentage. So yeah, it's something that for me, that's why I love punting free throws so much, because a lot of guys are scrambling and putting up guys who contributed positively in this category and weigh that so heavily in their mind that if you're punting it, you just don't worry about it. You can look at getting guys who give you good rebounds and blocks and steals, assists, points, and don't care about their free throw percentage. If they get to the line, they miss a couple that game, who cares? At least they're getting to the line and getting opportunity to score points. So for me, free throw percentage is the hardest contributor to change later in the draft. The second one, and one that's probably the most covered, the one that's the most obvious, is points. Points is the second hardest category to change later in the draft. Now, every player in the NBA scores points. There is that. But there's not many players outside the top 50 that score points on enough volume to change your team's sort of outlook in that category. So to give you an example of that, there were 39 players last season who scored 20-plus points per game. Only 7 of those 39 were ranked outside the top 50. And most of them, you're probably going to be drafting again inside the top 50 this season. So those 7 players were CJ McCollum, Jaylen Brown, Brandon Ingram, Bradley Beal, De'Aaron Fox, Tyler Hero, and Julius Randle. So of those 7 players, really it's only Randle and Hero who you're guaranteed to not draft in the top 50. Maybe Ingram, McCollum, and Jaylen Brown are around that pick 50 mark, but the rest of them are absolutely inside the top 50. So you've only really got 2 to 4 guys outside the top 50 that are going to give you 20-plus points per game. Some of those players that you might add into the mix there, like a Colin Sexton and an RJ Barrett, are 2 examples. They just didn't get that last year, but they could definitely get it this season. They have major deficiencies in their game. They are poor from the line, poor from the field. They don't give you any defensive stats. So there's a lot of guys, when you don't get the points earlier in the draft, it can be really hard to get them back. And if you do really need to get them back, you're going to be sacrificing a lot to do so. So if you want to be competitive in points, and a lot of teams do, which is, again, why I really like punting points. I think it's something that if you punt points, you're just not worrying about it. You can draft a Chris Paul, who's really good value. You can draft someone like a Robert Williams if he was healthy, which obviously he's not now. But those players that people overlook because they don't score enough points and they want to be competitive in that category, you can get really, really good value in those sort of players. So to me, points, whilst everyone scores them, if you want to be competitive, you've got to be getting them early in the draft. So if you're looking at 2 different players and you're not too sure, Tiebreaker, firstly, free throw percentage if you're trying to look after that. And secondly, do they score more points? Because that's going to be, again, it's usually what people are trying to be good at. So a lot of people are going to be chasing it. So you're going to have to go pretty hard at it if you want to be good at points. And then the third one here of categories that are hard to find is assists. Now, assists, again, similar to points, a lot of players get assists, but they're hard to find in high volume. And everyone likes point guards. Point guards are the vast majority of the players that go in the early rounds are point guards or ball handling shooting guards or playmaking forwards. All of these guys make up the best fantasy players. So there were, again, using last year's numbers, there were 44 players that averaged 5+ assists per game, and that averaged more than 15 games per season last season. That gets rid of a few guys that came in and put up 5+ assists in 2 games. So 44 players averaged 5+ assists, and only 17 of those guys ranked outside the top 50. So a little bit better than points, but still, vast majority of them ranked inside the top 50. And again, similar to points, if you are chasing those late assists, you do have to sacrifice some other categories. Field goal percentage, usually a big one. Blocks, again, and rebounds, usually the big ones with your point guards, like a D'Angelo Russell sort of type that might be ranked a little bit further back. But again, if you punt those categories, they can jump back up. But and then especially after pick 100, assists become very, very hard to draft. So I'm usually around that pick 100, the 90s. I'm making sure that if I'm happy with my assists, that's fine. But if I still want to boost that up, I'm doing that before then. That's why players like a Monty Morris, a player like Jalen Suggs, Markelle Fultz, if it turns out his foot is okay to start the regular season, those guys get elevated a bit, in my opinion, because they're a much harder category to find once the pick goes over pick 100. There's really not many guys. You're looking at backup bigs at that point, scoring wings that can give you steals and threes, just not a whole lot of assists outside pick 100. So if you want to be competitive in that category, it's definitely something you're going to have to look at. I don't think you have to be as gung-ho on it as you are with points and free throw percentage. Sometimes people get a little bit too needy in terms of getting assists. I think that maybe we can go a bit too crazy with that. Players like Luka Doncic gets maybe a bit pushed up a little bit high because of that. Maybe a player like Josh Giddey gets pushed up a little bit high because of that, even though he's got a lot of other deficiencies. So I think that maybe people can get too excited with that. But again, if you do want to be competitive, definitely before pick 80, pick 90, pick 100, before those late rounds, you've got to have that category locked up and maybe put away by that point. The last category, which we're going to touch on, which can become very scarce, and especially this season, is blocks. Now, blocks this year are looking very, very hard, and one of my favorite strategies this season is punting that blocks category because it's very concentrated in a few players. So, again, to give you guys some more stats, only 12 players blocked more than 1.5 shots per game. Only 12. And that were concentrated in a very few players. A lot of them are very risky, and a lot of them won't be doing it again this season. Mo Bamba, Mitchell Robinson, Hassan Whiteside was one of those guys. He's probably not going to do that again. Mo Bamba's probably not going to do that again. Daniel Gafford was one of those players. He's probably not doing it again. So there's already 3 out of your 12 guys that aren't really going to do much. Then you've got players like Kristaps Porzingis, Anthony Davis, risky, injury-prone. Then you've got Robert Williams, Jaren Jackson Jr., who are already injured. So you've got 3 players that aren't going to do it again because they're not going to be playing enough minutes. You've got 2 guys that are risky. You've got 2 guys then that are already injured. So there's 7 out of your 12 guys. And then you've got Miles Turner. Again, bit of risk there. I still think he's fine, but maybe he's traded. So there's only a few players that are really safe, solid block contributors. So it's very, very hard to find those guys that you can trust and those guys that will also help you in other areas. Players like Mitchell Robinson, they really only help you in blocks and field goal percentage. Someone like a Miles Turner, sure, he gives you excellent blocks and maybe he hits a 3 and decent free throw percentage, but doesn't give you any steals or assists. The points are whatever. The rebounds aren't that great for a center either. So again, value is very much concentrated in that area. So if you want it, you're going to have to go and get it early. And it does make me more keen to take the risk on guys like Anthony Davis, guys like Kristaps Porzingis, who are typically guys that we don't like to have in our teams because they are injured a lot. I think you're going to have to pull the trigger on those guys if you want to be competitive in blocks. The other thing I want to talk about with blocks is the combination of blocks and good free throw percentage. A lot of the time, the guys that put up good blocks are poor free throw shooters. There were only actually 8 players in the NBA who provided a positive contribution to free throw percentage and blocked more than 1 shot per game. Only 8 in the entire NBA. And 4 of them were top 50 players. So Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns, Kristaps Porzingis, and Jaren Jackson Jr. The other guys were just sort of down the back. I think Jeremy Grant might have been one of them. He just got to 1 block per game. There's a few other guys that I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But yeah, so there's only 4 guys in the top 50. And again, Jaren Jackson Jr. is already injured. Kristaps Porzingis is, he's a risky player. Embiid, you can say what you will. Cat, will he get a block per game this season with Rudy Gobert coming across? It's really, really hard to find safe, secure blocks. So for me, that does push players like Kristaps Porzingis. It pushes players up like Evan Mobley higher in the drafts. Rudy Gobert, 100% is a second-round player to me because of his steady, safe contribution to blocks. He's proved it year in, year out. Yes, the free throw percentage sucks, but be ready to either punt that category or look after it. If you want to be competitive in that category, you've got to look after it. If not, I think it's an excellent strategy to punt, which is why I think I spoke about in our pairings video with a player like Jokic. You can choose to punt the threes or the blocks. I'm choosing punt blocks all day long because I think it's just this year, especially with a lot of the injuries to those key guys, it's a hard category to be competitive in and also to be competitive with that as well as other ones. So for me, it's a great punt strategy this season. On the other side of things, guys, we'll just go through really quickly just the stats that are easiest to find later in drafts. The first and most obvious one to me is 3-pointers made. Again, I'm giving you a lot of stats in this podcast today. 73 players in the NBA made over 2 threes per game last season, and 32 of them actually ranked outside the top 100. So there's 32 guys outside the top 100 that can give you over 2 threes per game, and this changes all the time. You're going to have weeks where some guys are injured, some guys come in, you can stream it off the waiver wire. This is by far the easiest category to get off the waiver wire, get late in drafts. So for me, if I'm deciding between 2 players and one guy's getting a lot of his value from threes, the other guy's getting a lot of his value from maybe more points and free throw percentage, easily I'm going to take this guy here because it's just harder to replace. It's harder to find later in drafts. So that's why players like James Harden, to me, are more valuable than Steph Curry. Those guys they're just harder things to find later in drafts, and even if they quote-unquote rank similar, I'm always going to take that guy ahead of the threes guy, in my opinion, because it's just more replaceable. You can get those guys outside the top 100 and outside even on the waiver wire. And then the other one here, I think that's really easy to find, is steals. So again, 91 players averaged over a steal per game last season, and again, 34 of them were outside the top 100. So more than a third of the players that average a steal per game were outside the top 100. There were 30 guys who averaged 1.4 steals per game, and 8 of them were outside the top 100. So you can still get guys who are elite in that category. 1.4 steals is elite. That's hard to do. Only 30 guys did it, and 8 of them were outside the top 100. So you can find guys that are some of the best in that category outside the 100, even if you stream them off the waiver wire. Matisse Thybulle is a good example. Just grab them off your waiver wire, throw them in there. Alex Caruso is another one. These guys can do that sort of a thing, and you don't have to spend the draft capital to find that. So again, weighing up 2 different players. If I've got a guy who gives me really good blocks versus really good steals, I'm going to take the blocks guy if I want to be competitive in that category. And for me, and that's another reason why I'm not a big fan of punting steals, because I can make up for it later. I don't have to really worry about, my first 2 picks didn't get, they're not great in steals. That's fine. I can still take care of that later and still be competitive in that, even though I haven't concentrated on it earlier in drafts. Whereas those other categories, free throws, points, assists, I can't do that. That's much, much harder to do. So I hope you guys learned something in this podcast today. Let me know what you are doing when it comes to drafting down below in the comments. Are you targeting anything in particular? Do you have a favorite punt strategy this season? For me, it's punt points and punt blocks. Probably not those two together, but one or the other. I think those are my two favorite, and then maybe a punt free throw percentage as well as another one that I really like. So those are the three that I'm leaning towards the most. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure, again, like we said at the start of the pod, check out ballboysnba.com. Grab yourself a season draft guide for just $10. Subscribe, like the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Laters.